All right. This is a welcome surprise because I have been pleased so far, like a lot of people, with the legitimacy of a lot of these guys on this candidate list for the Texans. They've requested interviews from Jonathan Gannon, Ben Johnson, the Detroit OC. Those guys are both interesting because Ben Johnson, the Detroit OC, flipped that offense around and made Jared Goff look like a viable quarterback after everybody else had given up on him. Mike Kafka, I hadn't listed here, is the Giants OC, and he's made Daniel Jones look viable. So I'm all for taking guys that didn't look like viable quarterbacks and making them look viable if they can do that with anybody the likes of who we've had in here. But this news that Sean texted me about Sean Payton this afternoon was really cool, just because I feel like after spending an entire offseason, 2 off seasons now, and getting Googling Googling David Culley and the first result coming up as a gym manager in Long Island 2 years ago, that was kind of different than Googling Sean Payton. And then finding out that Lovie Smith had gotten the job after the Texans had painstakingly announced all the candidates and finalists and still gone with a guy out of nowhere under really weird circumstances and Lovie Smith. That was unpleasant too. So I honestly don't have Sean Payton as my favorite for a few different reasons, and I'll tell you about those. But there's a certain level of legitimacy and I think validation that the team has said that they're going to go about things differently. This feels like a different list. This feels like guys that belong on the list. I don't see a single Josh McCown on the list or anything like it. Until Sean Payton entered the fray, these were all guys who were 35 to 45 years old, established in the NFL, but up and coming in a lot of respects, each with their own different merits. And real quick, before somebody brings up, because I'm going to talk, you saw in the thumbnail, I'm going to talk about DeMeco and Sean Payton. Two things. One, this morning, Sean Pendergast and I had Nick Casario on. And Casario, without saying DeMeco's name specifically, brought up that a lot of reports about people, if there are reports about people not being interested, it couldn't be further from the truth, that people had been very, very interested, and it is hard. In the absence of anybody else being reported as not being interested in the job, I assume he was talking about DeMeco Ryans. And that makes sense, because I'll be honest, even if DeMeco didn't want the job, the dumbest thing in the world, and DeMeco is not a dumb person, would be to put it out there that you don't want a job opportunity. Because that's, it was one thing last year when he just stopped interviewing because he wanted to focus on his current job. But to say that you don't want to go to a certain place before any other teams have reached out, you're hurting your own market. You're hurting that perceived value. And I have reason to believe that DeMeco would be interested. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited that that's still in play after a report that I don't doubt that somebody told Aaron Wilson that DeMeco wasn't interested, but I think that perhaps that person maybe didn't have the whole story. As far as Sean Payton, the biggest issue, and I saw Landry Locker. You guys should watch The Locker Room. He's got a YouTube channel. He's doing stuff every day, and he's very good. One of Landry's reservations was that Sean Payton has been out of football for a year, that he had to take a break, and he would wonder where his headspace was. I'm going to get to that in a second. The other big consideration is that you'd have to trade for Sean Payton. The Saints still have his rights. Coaches in the past have gone from anywhere from John Gruden for a couple of first-round picks plus, when he went to Tampa, a team that was ready to win right away, to a first-round pick and some later picks to later picks. I'm guessing Payton would command at least a first-round pick plus I don't know what else. And that's where you got to weigh, is he worth that much? As far as Payton taking a year off, and that was one of Landry's big points, I don't think that's as big a deal. That doesn't bother me at all. I think you see Sean McVay right now. who's seems like the most upbeat and positive guy in the world. It's taken a toll on him over these last couple of years. And I do think that in New Orleans, they spent so much time those last few years trying to scrap everything together for an aging Drew Brees that it probably somewhere along the way started feeling a lot more like work and less like passion for Sean Payton. So I get it. One thing I was wrong about was, and this is how far I am away from kind of Landry. Landry and I just have different philosophies on this. I thought when Andy Reid left Kansas City, I thought when he left Philadelphia, that it was the dumbest thing in the world that he was going immediately into another job. This is going to be a disaster. I can't believe what Kansas City is doing. Clowns. It worked out all right. So, but he had, Andy Reid had the tragedy with his son, and had just had a mess of a last year in Philadelphia. He was revitalized by a new setting, and I think Sean Payton, probably around the same age that Andy Reid may have been when he made that switch, can be similarly revitalized. I'm just torn right now between the legitimacy of Sean Payton and my personal admiration for DeMeco Ryans. It's hard to separate how I feel about DeMeco as a man and like as an example of like everything you'd ever want in a football player. And I know that guys respect him like that as a coach too. It's hard, and I think back to some of the guys that I know that like played college football with Mike Vrabel. That as Matt Finkes, I talked to him about Vrabel. They were those guys when they had those three. Luke Fickell, Matt Finkes, and Mike Vrabel, all on the defensive line there at Ohio State when they were in college. They were studs. And guys would talk about Vrabel like he's a leader of men, a haver of it, as Battle Red Blog called it. And I think DeMeco has a lot of those qualities. He's a defensive-minded coach, but he spent his entire career he spent much of his career playing on teams that played a Kubiak-Shanahan system, or coaching on a team with the 49ers that play obviously a Kubiak-Shanahan system. So I think he understands that scheme, and I think he'd be pretty good at picking out offensive coordinators for it. Payton, I think Payton's going to do well with wherever he goes. The two aspects that are the biggest obstacles other than the trade would be one, and I'm guessing somebody's already brought this up, Sean Payton talking about the small quarterbacks. When asked, was he on with Colin Cowherd? He was asked about whoever he was on with. He was asked about Tua Tagovailoa, and Sean Payton had said, how about we just stop drafting guys who aren't the prototype? And he went into a discussion about Bill Parcells, and Bill Parcells he had this planet theory of, guys, there's only so many human beings on the planet that are a certain size and weight, and when you got a chance at taking one of those guys at the top of the draft, you take it. And there are exceptions to that. He actually brought up Aaron Glenn, former Texan, as an exception that Bill Parcells drafted, because Aaron was small, but he was just so good, and he was just the right kind of guy that he was okay with it. I think that it remains to be seen what Sean Payton thinks of Bryce Young. I think him putting that out there, he mentioned in the interview that if you've got a unicorn, or you've got some guy that's definitely an exception, then, by all means take him. But I didn't get the sense, and they weren't talking about Bryce Young, I didn't get the sense that's the way he felt about it. So then it comes down to, okay, are you okay if Sean Payton comes along with drafting some other guy? Is he going to start reaching and trying to stretch and get? Well, let's remember, he was a guy that signed Drew Brees as a veteran. He didn't have to draft a quarterback. Drew Brees was the first pick in the second round, not a highly touted guy. Is he going to go chasing something like that? I don't know. The other big objection people have with Sean Payton, or they wonder what would he want to come here for a rebuild? And I think that you have to look at what the competition is right now, because Denver has an awesome defense, but they also have an awful quarterback who's on the hook for $200 million over the next several years. And by the way, no draft picks, because because Denver traded all those draft picks to get Russell Wilson. So I don't see that as something that Sean Payton wants to take on. I think that's way more of a rebuild than the Texans, even though the Broncos have a good defense already. It's not going to be so easy to maneuver with those salary cap constraints. So with the Texans, I think it's a matter of how much of a rebuild does he think it is and who is the quarterback. I personally am not really all that fond of like calling anything in the NFL a long rebuild. You either rebuild or you don't. And more times than not these days, or as many times as it isn't, it ends up being a relatively rapid turnaround. I mean, think about how long ago was it that the 49ers had 2 head coaches in 2 years. They went and hired Kyle Shanahan, and they were in the Super Bowl within a few years. So I don't think that most coaches, especially with egos like Sean Payton, and he's got an appropriately large ego, they don't look at it and think, oh boy, it's going to take me a while to turn this thing around because I don't really trust in my own abilities. Which, by the way, that's another one too. When I see people saying, oh, they're going to look at this job and they're going to see that you fired David Culley and then a year later fired Lovie Smith. And what's that mean? Who the hell? Are you going to hire a guy who doesn't think that he's 400 times better than David Culley? Like, Culley, how on earth did that ever happen? If David Culley could get fired, then what possibly could Sean Payton accomplish? He's not wired like that. Neither should you be, any of you out there. The DeMeco, let's see, Seth, do you think DeMeco would have any trouble attracting quality coordinators and filling out his staff? It's a really good question. And let me put it up there because that's such a good question. And I'm just learning the technology. So I wonder with DeMeco if that was perhaps one of the reasons he pulled himself out of the race last year and stopped taking interviews, because I think that he wanted to get some more seasoning and have a plan in place. But that is a huge part of it. Is, do you have your coordinators lined up? Do you have all those guys lined up? And that's one of those that's one of those things that when you interview a guy, sure, it's great to get to know their their philosophy and their personality and all of that, but a lot of it is just, are you going to come in and do you have a plan and do you have guys in place and what are we going to do? So I'm hoping if DeMeco is to get the job, that's part of what he spent this last offseason doing. And I think DeMeco too. I got to tell you, and I know some of you heard this story before, but DeMeco was a rookie in 2005. That was my, or 2006, sorry. That was my last year in the NFL, my last full season in the NFL. And in training camp, we'd come off of a 2-14 season, and we had some veterans that we'd signed in the offseason, and, they drafted some dudes in 2006, Mario Williams, DeMeco Ryans, Owen Daniels, Eric Winston. My God, that was a good draft class. David Anderson played a bunch. That was a really good draft class. So DeMeco comes in, and I've always felt like rookies should earn it, like that they shouldn't just be slid into a starting job. So about the second week of training camp, maybe it was the first week of training camp, they put DeMeco in as a starter at middle linebacker. And I can remember the first day he was in, he was having a hard time getting the play call out, and I got frustrated, and I started yelling at him and everything, just being a grumpy old jock or a grumpy old vet. And DeMeco first, because he'd been coached by Saban, it didn't faze him at all. He was super respectful of me as a veteran, but it didn't faze him at all. He calmed down and he got the call out. And I remember within 2 days, I was like, I should just be calling this guy sir. Like, he's so dialed in, and he ended up being defensive rookie of the year. He was so mature, and just everything. Like, when I've been on teams, there's always guys that just kind of do things the right way, and they're more mature. And don't get me wrong, I worked my butt off and everything, and I think I was very professional. But then there were guys like DeMeco that just were like the perfect football player. Remember when Bill Belichick got all teary talking about Teddy Bruschi when he retired? Like, because he was the perfect football player. That's what DeMeco was in terms of just being a leader and doing everything right. So it's hard for me not to transfer those feelings over to how he would be as a coach. But that's also just more of what you learn in the interview process. Let's see. Anthony Lynn is on the 49ers staff. He's a prior head coach. Okay, the only problem with Anthony Lynn is this, that Ben Johnson, who's one of the candidates, is the guy who took over for Anthony Lynn last year and immediately turned around the Lions offense when Anthony Lynn was the offensive coordinator, I believe. Somebody fact check me on that. And so I don't, but that is somebody that's obviously a possibility. Okay, this is another great question. Tony asks, would Casario take a lesser role for Payton and give up draft picks for him too? Okay, today when we had Casario on, Casario walked back some of his comments about how he would step aside. I think, and he explained, he was trying to make a point that he really just tries to always keep in mind what are the best long-term interests for the team. And I think he probably either exaggerated or by way of trying to prove a point, it came out awkwardly. And so I don't know. It's a really good question. Would he take a lesser role? Because I think with Sean Payton, I don't think Sean Payton is going to take a job where he doesn't have pretty much final say on everything, right? And who knows? Maybe he and Mickey Loomis had run their course there in New Orleans. I don't know. So I don't know about that. I think that's when it comes down to Cal. And I'm enjoying and I'm watching Cal kind of step into perhaps a new role right now. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but I've been trying to put things in perspective and remember over these last few days, because I told some of you the other day, it's annoying me that, yes, the Texans have been dysfunctional in a lot of ways the last couple of years, and because of a few different people. But I think you always have to remember and look at what's happened over the last couple of years. Because of all that dysfunction, perhaps, and because just of Deshaun Watson's own motivations, perhaps. I don't know what goes on in Deshaun's brain. You were conducting business over these last 2 years, over the last year, the off season of 2 off seasons, David Culley and Lovie Smith hires, after Deshaun Watson had demanded a trade, and then after Deshaun Watson, while still demanding a trade, had been accused of sexual misconduct by 24 women or more. So it was almost impossible to conduct things properly, and the Texans, in at least a large part due to their own responsibility, got themselves into that mess. I'm trying to reset everything and see how it operates moving forward. So I think with all of that, I'm not optimistic that Sean Payton is going to be the guy, but I'm not going to be overly distraught over it if he isn't. And that's, I'm more excited that this is like a legitimate list of names. This is the list of names. Here, we'll do a little bit more technology here. I'm going to present this screen and hope that I don't share any tabs that don't need to be seen by anybody. So, all right, there we go. Here's the list. We've got Jonathan Gannon, the Eagles defensive coordinator. And it's funny, some people today brought up the fact that Philly fans are upset with Jonathan Gannon, and they're not all that pleased with him. And there are some reasons, some legitimate concerns about him as a defensive coordinator, but it is also Philly. And much like we as Astros fans find ways to fret and wring our hands over the center field position as the Astros have the best record in baseball, I think that's a little bit of what is going on in Philly with Jonathan Gannon. He plays a lot of zone coverage, which it hasn't been the most popular choice of coverages, but zone versus man is way more complex than just saying, hey, it's zone or it's man. And I'm not too concerned about it. That defense has performed very, very well this year, particularly as a pass defense, not as good as a run defense. That's all starting to sound way too similar to Lovie Smith, but trust me, it's all cool. It's all good. Ben Johnson, the Detroit offensive coordinator, I just talked about him. He turned Detroit around last year, midway through the season, and I'm going to put Lamont's comment up here even as we go through this because I think that echoes what I was just saying. It just feels really good for the Texans to be doing normal stuff. Normal is the new blockbuster event for me in Houston. Yes. Bravo for normal. DeMeco Ryans. I feel like I've spoken at length on this DeMeco Ryans podcast about DeMeco Ryans. Evero, which just by alliteration and name alone, not to mention they have an awesome defense out there in Denver. I am intrigued. Okay, this is what I'm going to dig into. With Evero, it is so hard to maintain good morale on a defense when the offense just sucks. And I'm sure it's true otherwise, likewise with the offense. Maybe not, because those guys are a little less psychotic than us defensive players. But it's tough, man. It's tough. So it takes certain leadership to keep guys focused and to keep them from, playing the blame game. Remember, okay, the 93 Oilers, when Buddy Ryan punched Gavin Gilbride. A lot of that was based on the offense and the defense not getting along. My God, I got to go watch that documentary again. So Evero and his ability to just keep that defense focused and fight through what was a really miserable season, that'd be interesting to try to talk to people and hear about that. Shane Steichen, another Eagles guy. I think the work that he has done with Jalen Hurts, I think if you're going to talk about taking a guy who might not be a pure passer coming out of college and working with him to transform into something else, that's great. I think the hard thing with both Steichen and with Gannon is that they're also loaded up with talent, as is DeMeco with the 49ers. It's hard to separate those two, and I guess the best you could say is, well, if you get your crap together and you've got good talent on the Texans, then these guys could do the same thing with the Texans. Sean Payton, currently unemployed. I guess I should say Fox broadcaster. And then the one that I think I forgot, Mike Kafka. So Mike Kafka, just like Ben Johnson, intrigues me because they've taken two quarterbacks, Jared Goff with the Lions and Daniel Jones with the Giants, and resurrected hope for their careers. And that didn't necessarily seem like an achievable event going into this season, I don't think. I think it was one of those things in Detroit where people were saying, like, oh, yeah, you know what, Jared Goff, we might actually like him, and nobody believed him. It was kind of like when Pete Carroll was saying that there was a genuine quarterback competition back in the day between Russell Wilson and Matt Flynn, and I was like, yeah, whatever, Pete, you're goofy, you're weird. And then lo and behold, Russell Wilson would one day go on to hold the Broncos ransom. So let's see. Brian says, what's up, Seth? This is encouraging news. It is. And again, I like Lamont said and other people have said, I like that this is a normal list. I love that this is a normal list. I can't go back to the Josh McCown discussions. I can't do it. I got to tell you guys, honestly, I was, and I'll have to apologize to Sean Pendergast in the morning. I was like on the brink of a full-blown either panic attack or depressive episode about the Texans over the last couple days. And I've gotten so much better than I used to be. I don't flip out about stupid stuff as often, or if I do, I tend to pull myself back in. And I've learned how to detach myself a little bit and roll with the punches. But man, these last couple days, I've been like so overwhelmed by the uncertainty and the negativity that I was having a hard time controlling my breath and my heart rate. So I made today a mental health day where I've got a mental health checklist of like the exercise that I need to do and like various things I need to read and everything. And I got it all lined up that I had everything accomplished by 9 a.m. because I was about to freak out. And I got to tell you, it felt kind of good to be a little close to crazy again, because that's what sports should do to you. It allows you to get crazy about stuff that doesn't actually matter, so you can forget about the crazy stuff in your actual life. But it felt good to like be genuinely worried about the Texans. And I think it's because I felt like this could be a turning point, but I was worried that they would botch it. And I was really, like, I was not looking forward to our interview with Nick Casario because some of the things from the press conference, some of the things that have been said about the Texans nationally, and, some of the things that have been said about the Texans nationally, some of it's just been clickbait, but other parts of it have been the Texans have made their bed and they got to pay those consequences. But I do feel after talking to Casario this morning, after finding out that, I don't know, again, like I think it's because of the way I feel about DeMeco Ryans. I think seeing that door is still open and that avenue is still there, I feel good about that. And I think like just news that Sean Payton has been requested, that these other guys are the guys, that there's no Josh McCown, that intrigues me. So just to wrap things up on Sean Payton, I think we covered Landry being worried about the mindset of a guy who needed to step away for a year. I'm going to think more on that too. I disagree with Landry right now, but I'm going to think more on it. The why the rebuild designation. That part, and I addressed this a little bit earlier. I don't like thinking about rebuilds as being long drawn out processes. I don't think they need to be. I think that the Lions in some ways were down worse than the Texans are right now. And they did it. Well, we'll see what they do next year. They're in the middle of a turnaround. But I think that it was a much different feel with Dan Campbell last year, wasn't it? And it's a much different feel this year for Lions fans, right? And I think that makes a turnaround feel a lot different. And some of it just depends on, obviously, if you have a quarterback or if you despise your quarterback, like we did with Brock Osweiler. So that part I'm not too worried about. Oh, yes, the Bryce Young thing. Okay, we started to talk about that, and then I got sidetracked. So Sean Payton said that he doesn't want a Bryce Young type. I said that, he said that he doesn't want to go outside a prototype. The exception is if there's a guy that's a unicorn, and he brought up the example of Aaron Glenn. So there are a couple thoughts I have about that. One is that, okay, maybe Sean Payton does think that Bryce Young is a unicorn after getting into the scouting process and everything. That's a possibility. Two, maybe we shouldn't be as in love with Bryce Young. I'm nervous. I'm in love with Bryce Young, except I'm nervous about his size, and I'm not ashamed to admit it. I was going through for a while there, and I think this is good, but I feel like in society we've gotten to the point where whenever you start to feel something about like an assumption you're making, you think, wait a second, let me check myself here. Am I being racist? Am I being sexist? Am I being some kind of a bigot or something? And I feel like we've applied that to the actual size of a quarterback, because I get that same feeling where I'm like, wait a second, okay, am I sizist? And is it wrong to be sizist? I don't think it is, and I'm going to tell you why. Because when I was a defensive tackle, one year I decided, okay, at the time I wasn't a huge defensive tackle. It was before I came to Houston and discovered the avocado, and played in a 3-4. So I was like an average sized defensive tackle for the time, about 295, 300. But one year I decided, all right, I'm going to be a sleek athlete. And I got down to like 282 coming into camp, which shouldn't be a big deal, right? I was 282 as opposed to 295. And I got in and I came into camp and I was making plays like crazy. I was flying around all over the place. I was like knifing through the line and making TFLs and screwing up whole offensive periods and everything. And by about 4 or 5 weeks, I had just gotten the crap beat out of me physically. Like I was making all kinds of plays, but I was getting buffeted around. And it might not seem like a big deal, like 12 or 13 pounds, but it was just, it was a big difference. It was a big difference for me in my position. So when you look at the NFL, and the last quarterback drafted in the first round who weighed less than 200 pounds was Jim McMahon. Then Jim McMahon had the hell beat out of him for years and years and was injured all the time. And it wasn't just because Jim McMahon was a big party dude, because it turns out, according to propaganda that I've read at least, that he actually wasn't that big of a partier. He just he wore sunglasses because of an eye condition, and because he had like a really bad haircut once that looked like a punk rock haircut, he got dubbed the punk rock quarterback. I don't know if I'm buying it all completely, because I know there's also a story that Ditka told once where he could tell when McMahon had the Friday morning flu, which is something that you get after you go out boozing on Thursday night. So somewhere in between. But McMahon was banged up a lot. He was a tiny quarterback. He was 190 pounds. So I'm worried about Bryce Young's size. Let's see. Get DeMeco here. Seth, call him up. What if DeMeco gets hired and he wants you to be the D-line coach? I will not do it because coaching is not the life I want. I've thought about it. I've got so much respect for coaches, like football coaches, volleyball coaches, any coaches, because there's a level of obsession and attentiveness to detail, attention to detail that I just don't have. I'm too ADHD, and I don't think I'd be good at it, honestly. Like I think sometimes I used to talk about why I didn't want to be a coach, and it almost sounded like, well, yeah, I could, but I don't want to do it. Like, no, I don't think I'd be good at it. They're really, you gotta love just grinding and like focusing and obsessing on details. And I'm more of a, like reading 8 different books at a time and getting distracted on the way to the grocery store, to where my wife has to call me to remind me that I was going to the grocery store. Let's see. Stephen A. Smith, let's see. How was Payton without Breeze? How good was Payton without Breeze? Well, he lost play calling duties with the Cowboys once, if I recall. So, wait, let me stop sharing that. I'll stop sharing this. Or I'll just find the. Let's do this all together. Payton loses play calling, Cowboys. I don't know if I remember that's exactly how it went. But you know what? That's Payton, not Parcells, will call Cowboys plays. I can't remember. It was back in 2005. Bill Parcells is letting someone else call the offensive plays, an unusual relinquishment of control for the Dallas Cowboys coach. Somebody remind me exactly what happened there. Hey, Francisco. Okay. Back to the serious stuff. No more of this. No more of me misremembering stories from long ago. Okay. I'm not a height supremacist. I don't care that Bryce Young might be short. Russell Wilson's short. Drew Brees was short. So I don't care about the height. I care about the size. I care about the body weight. That's all I care about. And the thing that's changed too is that I asked Nick Casario about this today, and he didn't give. I know. I enjoyed my conversation with Casario this morning, but he does a very good job of deflecting and not answering all the questions you ask him. Because I kept trying to. I tried to angle in on some of these size questions with Bryce Young, and one of the things is just simply look at the point of emphasis in the last 2 years on not landing on the quarterback, and I watched the Josh Dobbs when Josh Dobbs was playing for Tennessee the other night. Josh Dobbs, coming out of high school, was 6'3", 195, which is about the same body frame. If Bryce Young was, let's say if he were 5'11", 185, that might actually be a little thicker than 6'3", 195. But Dobbs now is 6'3", 215, supposedly. But he's a skinny dude. So I watched him take some of those hits, and defensive linemen aren't even going to the ground at all anymore. They'll like hit a guy, and if they can feel that he's going down, they'll lay off. So I do wonder, much in the same way that, back in the day, you wouldn't send a small receiver over the middle because he might literally lose his head. He might have his head ripped off by Steve Atwater or something. But when the rules started to change a little bit, they were able to go with smaller receivers. And I think that might come with quarterbacks too, because there's so little really hard contact. So I've gone back in that game. I watched a couple hits that Josh Dobbs took, and I thought, oh man, I don't know if Bryce Young could take something like that. Then you go back and you watch it in slow motion, and yeah, he's getting the impact is hard, but then he's wafting off into the ether, and landing gently like a feather on the turf because there's nobody landing on him. Nick Bosa, I saw him twice this year get flagged for basically almost like laying a guy down like he was going to tuck him into bed. And but that was too much. That was just too much weight coming down on the guy, and they flagged him. So I'm not a heightist, man. Not a heightist. Will the Texans hire J.J. Watt as head coach? Better than Josh McCown. I know J.J. is not interested in going into coaching as of now. It's a hard thing. That's the other hard thing. Once somebody makes $130 million or so, like they got to really, this is what I feel about Romo. When people always suggest Romo going into coaching, like the number one prerequisite, and any coach out there, high school coach, anybody would I think agree with me on this. Like the number one prerequisite to being a good coach is a burning desire to coach. There's just too much energy that goes into it, and I don't think Romo. Okay, have you guys paid attention to how much prep Romo actually puts into games? Yeah, I don't think that's Romo's deal. I don't think he's gonna be wanting to coach. JJ, I think probably wants to pursue a bunch of other stuff, and it's been a weird year for him because he had that heart scare. Then he had his son, and there was they showed a video. I haven't watched it yet today, but I think it was from the Cardinals. It was either on Hard Knocks or it wasn't, but I think they must have showed him a tribute video. But I just saw a little snippet of him breaking down crying. He's been way more emotional in a lot of ways than we ever saw him, and it's been cool to watch JJ grow up. From a young guy that was very driven and motivated to be famous and all of that, to where now it feels like he cares about his brothers and his family more than he cares about his own self-promotion or anything. And I've gotten to know, I'd always known JJ a little bit, but I got to know him a lot more over in the last few years. And it's been really cool to just see like how, I told you about DeMeco Ryans and how impressive he is as a person. Like JJ, and how dialed in he is to doing things the right way, in almost like he's a walking daily planner. It's kind of freakish, and it's something to aspire to. Not in this lifetime. It's too late. It's too late for me. But you guys should aspire to it. All right, I'm gonna take a couple more. I'll get Lamont here. Let's see. Okay, maybe this is just me being Lamont. But is that Doc book behind you, the hip hop? No, that's no. Sorry, and that's a green screen behind me right now because we're doing work. So I'm faking all you guys right now. It's Doc Holiday. Sorry, it's Roy Holiday because I haven't read. I'm going to show you. Let me look at these books right now. I gotta repopulate that. My wife put that together the other day. I haven't read. I'm gonna show you. Oh wait, what happened? Right now. Shit. I gotta repopulate that. Excuse my language, everybody. Okay, so the books that I've actually read on that list in there, I read *Sapiens*. I read *First Principles*, which is an interesting book about. Hold on, Lamont. I gotta X you out of here. I did not read. I started to read the book about Roy Holiday. Because he's psychotic. Muggsy, it's the little Muggsy Bogues. That book I have not read yet. That was sent to me as part of we were supposed to be doing an interview. Breath is a really good book. That changed my life. That's a book about just the importance of breathing through your nose, breathing exercises. Like in lieu of, I tried for years to meditate, and would always fail miserably. And I read that book and just started focusing on breathing exercises, and it just switched, flipped the switch in me. It was really cool, and it's helped out a lot. This is that, damn it. It's a murder mystery about the girl that grew up in a swamp there. That was a good book. So good that I can barely remember. I think that's The Art of Life. That's by some Buddhist monk. That I was reading during the pandemic. And that was pretty cool. That actually, The Art of Life, that's, even if you are a devout Christian, I think that you might like this book. He approaches, this is more on a philosophical level, I think, that can apply to a lot of different things. And that's all I can see there. I think that was a book about speech writing. First Principles is, I told you that. That's about the basically the Greek and Roman roots of thought and philosophy of the founding fathers. And one of the really interesting things I learned in that book, which gives me a whole new appreciation to the show Highlander on Netflix that my wife and I watch, which is like the Scottish influence on the American Revolution. The two-thirds of the people who signed the Declaration of Independence had tutors growing up who were Scottish. So like the Scots came over and they're tutoring all these young, English colonists, but the Scottish tutors are telling them all about John Locke and all these other people. And it kind of, over time and over the decades, built into the revolution. For some people, I know, there's a whole little, it wasn't absolute. Okay, that book was also really interesting when it came to John Adams and one of the southern signers of the Declaration of Independence who actually set his slaves free because he was so conflicted about it. It's James Madison, I believe. So anyway, First Principles, good book. And let's see. Okay, Lamont says I should read the 48 Laws of Power. I'll do that. And then I'm going to read one more. Oh, yeah, Where the Crawdads Sing. Thank you, James. It was an excellent book that I couldn't remember the name of. That's a good story. Okay. Did you see that Paul Gallant clip where Hannah said, I can answer that before Casario answered the question? Are we about to see another Jerry Jones with Cal and Hannah? When was that? No, I didn't see that. I'll call Paul. Paul. Paul's a muckraker, he is. He's good at that stuff. No, okay, so before Casario answered the question, was that an interview after the press conference? I don't know. I'll tell you what. Hannah's not a joke. And I mean that in a good way. I think Hannah has learned a lot about the pitfalls the traps that can come when somebody's operating a business. I guess the other thing about earlier, if you're on, and we were talking about kind of just the dysfunction of the last 2 or 3 years and how it just feels like it's been one thing after another. And I do feel like there's a chance that the Texans might be actually pulling themselves out of this into being more of a normal franchise. It's that I try to keep perspective and remember that you had the Deshaun Watson situation, which, okay, you've got two things with Deshaun. You have his personal life and you have his professional life. And Deshaun's disgruntlement with the team, I think, had a lot to do with the dysfunction on the team. Whoever you want to blame, whoever your boogeyman is, whether it's, Jack Easterby, Bill O'Brien, whoever it might be. There was that, but then there was also the fact that Deshaun Watson was asking for a trade while he was untradeable. And all the decisions that were made over the course of 18 months were colored by that it was just a very, very uncomfortable, awkward, impossible situation. And then the other side of it is that Cal McNair took over, full-time control and ultimate responsibility after his father died. And I think that there was a period there of kind of trying to find himself and trying to navigate being the sole owner of the team. Or not, he's not the sole owner, but you know what I mean, the actual shot caller on the team. So again, I hope that's changing around. It feels different. All right, let's see. I'm going to call this off, everybody, and I really appreciate it. If you can follow, that'd be awesome. If you could like it, that would be awesome. I'm really enjoying YouTube, and I'm going to try to be as consistent as Landry is with these. Landry kind of was the spark that encouraged me to do this. So go follow The Locker Room with Landry. I've got a punnable name, and Landry's got a punnable name. So we share that in common. And we're both tall because we're heightists. All right, thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.